because you listen to this outstanding podcast, I'd like to invite you to check out another one that you may like as well. I'm Tom Rowland, host of Saltwater Experience television show and the Tom Rowland podcast. Each week, I drop 3 brand new shows, including interviews with extreme performers like the true giants of the fishing world, authors, athletes, Navy SEALs, and regular people with extraordinary stories to learn what took them to the top and how we can apply those same principles to our lives. How-to episodes are on Tuesday, and tune in for Physical Fridays to make sure you're on the path to catch a tarpon when you're 95 years old or be at your very best tomorrow. So search for the Tom Rowland Podcast where you listen, or go to tomrowlandpodcast.com and come on over.
Oh, dude, that's a nice fish. That's a nice fish.
This is another episode of the Amaazen Outdoors Podcast. I am Brian Mays. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. Today's episode is number 45. I sit down with the Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse Society. We have their annual spring fling coming up on April 30th. It includes a double gun shoot contest. You should check it out. It's in the show notes. Here we go. I'm going to try to make this super quick. We have a ton of new content, a lot queued up. Make sure you're subscribed, and also make sure that you have your downloads turned on. If you would be so kind to take the extra step and leave us a rating and review, that'd be awesome. Thank you. This podcast is sponsored by Upland Outfitters. You can join Patreon and win a pair of these pants. They're kick-ass. If you want to go check them out, go to uplndoutfitters.com. Todd, Paul, Pat, the Amaazen Outdoor hats will be in the mail on Friday. Thank you so much for joining Patreon. I've got like 6 or 7 of these hats left. If you join this month, and you can join for March alone, or you could stay on until June, the hat is yours, and you're also going to get an entry per month for June's drawing. So you can just join for 1 month. Think about it. You get a free hat. I don't even think I can ship them to you for that price. So get the hat and a chance to win a $200 pair of hunting pants. You really can't go wrong with this deal. Sport Dog. Check them out for your full line of training collars. They've got everything from yard to multi-dog GPS collars. They've got something for you. Gear the way you design it. Check them out. All right. Episode 40, Patriots of Praise. You really should listen to that one. We're starting to get a lot of downloads on it. Those guys are doing good things. You should also check out the show notes for information about April 30th. I am more than likely going to be at the Pine City event for the Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse and their spring fling and double gun shoot. It's a great thing for conservation for sharp-tailed grouse in the state of Minnesota, and there's going to be some good conservation presentations and programming by the Wild River Conservancy. They used to be the St. Croix River Association, but they're going to be doing some stuff in the morning. Check that out. Check out the show notes. Come on out. It raises some good money for Sharpies in Minnesota. All right. Episode 45. I've got Kyle and Derek. They're from the Minnesota DNR, and they're both part of MSGS, the Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse Society. This is a good one. Enjoy today's show. All right. I think we are recording. We're uploading. Yippee. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Amaazen Outdoors Podcast. I am super stoked for today. I've got a couple guys here on a topic that is going to be dropped in immediately. So they have a get-together that I would like to highlight before it gets too late here in the podcast schedule. So Derek and Kyle with the Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse Society. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So, Kyle, why don't you start us out here? Why don't you introduce yourself to the show and the listeners and give us a little bit on your background?
All right, you bet. So, Kyle Arola, I am currently the vice president for the Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse Society. I have been in this role for, about 4 or 5 years now. And I guess stepping back a little bit into my background, I grew up on the Iron Range here in Minnesota, Virginia specifically. And it was an awesome place to grow up, having countless acres of national forests, boundary waters in your backyard. Basically, every weekend was spent out on some sort of adventure, whether it was going out in June chasing walleyes from the canoe, or spending those chilly November mornings up in a deer stand. So, growing up, significant amount of time was spent outdoors, and that's where my passion for wildlife developed. I mean, we're talking back to 10, 11, 12 years old, getting to know the different wildlife species, getting to know their habitats, what they needed. And I think by the time I was probably 14 or 15 years old, and I had met an assistant wildlife manager with the Minnesota DNR, and he was talking about the work that he gets to do, and it was basically at that moment like, yeah, this is what I want to do. So I spent 2 years at the Mesabi Community College right there in Virginia, knocking out my general coursework, and then from there I went to St. Cloud State University, where I spent a couple more years finishing up my bachelor's degree in wildlife biology. And then I actually stayed on there for 2 more years, where I pursued my master's degree. After I
so
finished,
you really liked college?
No, I didn't really like college. It was what I felt to be a necessity at the time to go on and to secure that job, because when you look at the big picture with wildlife positions, whether it's a federal agency or a state agency or a private entity like Pheasants Forever, Ducks Unlimited, whatever it may be, there's a lot of people that go to school for it, and at the end of the day, there's not a lot of positions. So doing things to try to separate yourself from the rest is what I thought was key. Getting that master's degree, spending time volunteering.
The master's degree doesn't hurt. I was just giving you crap, man.
Nope. It didn't hurt, but
so when did you, if you don't mind me asking, when did you graduate from SCSU?
I graduated in May of 2013.
Okay. Did you do any track and field at all by chance?
No track and field.
Okay. My buddy was the assistant track and field coach up there for a while, so.
Okay. Nope, that running, it hasn't been my favorite thing. So
you like that even less in college, huh?
Right.
Well, anything else you want to share? Otherwise, I'm going to give Derek the opportunity to introduce himself as well.
Nope, that's good for me.
Well, we'll chat in a bit here about some of the hunting opportunities and fishing opportunities up on the range. But Derek, do you want to give the listeners a little bit of your background?
Yeah, sure. Derek Frost. I'm coming in as a former treasurer for Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse Society. I was a treasurer for about 5 years, and recently stepped away. I've got 2 small kids, and just couldn't find the time anymore to do it, but still stay involved whenever I can. I guess I grew up over by New York Mills. I grew up hunting and fishing. That's big whitetail deer hunting area. If any of your listeners are familiar with the area.
Is New York Mills, that right? I'm trying to think, is Lund boat out of New York Mills, or is that the next town over?
Yep, Lund Boats. I actually was a janitor out of there growing up.
Okay.
In Otter Tail County, it's got my deer permit area, I think, harvests almost 2,000 more deer than the next closest one.
Really?
Lots of deer, but no sharptail. I started my job here in Aiken for the Minnesota DNR in 2016, and I'd never seen a sharptail prior to that. And one of my first job duties, starting in February, was to go do sharptail lek counts. And I guess I fell in love with the birds the moment I saw them. If anyone hasn't seen them dance on a lek, I
It's life
suggest you do.
changing.
Yeah,
For me, it was.
it is a life changing event, and I mean these birds are pretty charismatic, and a lot of people don't know about them, and that's kind of why I got involved with MSGS, to kind of bring awareness about the birds and ultimately raise money to help restore habitat for them.
Well, I will go one step further and say that we wouldn't be having this conversation today if I did not get a chance to sit and experience that luck viewing last year. It changed me. It's kind of that day I felt I put that conservation merit badge on the good old, Boy Scout sash. It just, I did not know the, you see things online, and I knew about prairie chickens and their dance and spray and sharptails. I mean, sage grouse, the National Geographic channel did a really cool segment on them, but you just don't see it nearly as much about sharptails, and you see it even less about these Midwestern sharptails, Wisconsin and Minnesota's. So, I can't, I can't tell listeners enough that if they get an opportunity to go do something like that, take it. It is so cool. I remember crawling into that lek or the blind before sunup, and they finally left. There was some kind of disturbance. I don't know. They all flew off at about 10 o'clock in the morning, but it was like 5. It was probably 4:45. I crawled in there. So 5 hours went by. I didn't think I was in that blind for more than 50 minutes. And just time evaporated. And it was just so cool. They sound like little Martians dancing. So does the Minnesota, I know the Minnesota DNR had sharptail viewing prior to COVID. Are you guys bringing that back with kind of some of the lightening of restrictions and things this year?
Um, in my area, no. I can cover that a little bit with our lek viewing camera, but there was a study that they did in my area about the blinds, and they found out a lot of folks were not showing up before sunrise and leaving early,
Sure.
and just causing too big of a disturbance for our declining population. So we're going with the.
Oh, go ahead, Derek. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say we're going with the webcam to still provide the opportunity, but I think we'll probably get rid of the in-person viewing leks or viewing blinds. Sorry.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, you have to, if there isn't somebody there checking you in, and you're leaving this up to, people to be responsible. Unfortunately today, just people aren't responsible enough. I don't know what it is, but you can't, I was worried when I was in that blind. I dropped, I can't remember what I dropped, but I had camera equipment with me, some sound equipment, and I knew I was carrying a bunch of stuff into this blind. So, I mean, I got there half an hour before nautical twilight or, daybreak. So, but, hunters and people like that who are in the outdoors, I think they understand those things. But when you have people who are maybe just trying to get in or interested in these things, and they're not outdoorsmen or don't deer hunt, it's difficult to probably convey that and then see that through. So because of some of these, I don't want to say disturbances, but the reason there's more of a reasoning behind just people disturbing these sharptails over in east central Wisconsin or Minnesota. You've also noticed a huge decline in lek numbers, and I would assume because of that, in combination with people not respecting the sharptails well, that's kind of partly why you guys are having to go with this viewing camera option by you guys.
Yeah, we can kind of jump into decline. So
Yeah, I'd like to see if you could enlighten us a little bit about what's kind of going on right now.
Yep. Just to give out some numbers. From our survey, just in the past 2 years, in 2019, we counted 30 leks. We have an annual survey first. Maybe I'll cover that, where we go out and count.
And maybe you could even step just a further back and kind of maybe just real quickly how you guys do the Lex surveys.
Yeah. So our Lex surveys, we kind of start with those. Peak attendance, kind of the week of April. So we kind of start in April, and we go to known active Lex sites. We show up sunrise. We have about 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours, and we look for calm mornings because they make quite a bit of noise. So if we have to locate them, we can usually locate them by noise. But we show up and we try to count the males and females that are attending the lek in the morning. So it's kind of a tough survey because a lot of our leks are so spread out, and these
Well, and
birds use.
it's hard to when I sat on that lek, they asked me to fill out a survey as well, and it's just hard to keep track of them all. Like, you got males wandering in and out, you got hens that are, I was sitting in a pine barren, jack pine, brand new fort, it maybe reseeded 5 years prior. So you've got all these little jack pines and all the little divots from the planting and roll pine planting equipment. It's hard as hell to see them all.
Definitely, and just to visit all the leks, these birds use quite a big swath of habitat. Upwards of 1 to 3 square miles can kind of be a complex that the birds use. So sometimes these leks are out in the middle of a swamp where you have to access them, half a mile walking in or snowmobile, depending on ground conditions, ATV. So it takes quite a few mornings out of my spring, but as I mentioned in my intro, I mean, it's an amazing thing to watch, and I truly do enjoy doing the surveys. So transitioning into the decline. So this year, the DNR survey in the East Central Range only counted 18 leks with greater than 2 birds. And just rewind to 2019, that number was 30. So that's a decline of 32% in the number of leks with greater than 2 birds in the area that we counted.
And I think Kyle had shared, was it 2018, had an even substantially higher lek count number. So
yeah, as recently
at,
as 2010, we had 70 leks. So
yeah, so you're seeing a huge decline.
Yeah, a huge decline, discerning decline. Another thing we also consider is any lek with less than 5 birds is also vulnerable. I can speak more for Aiken because that's where I survey, but I would say even on the eastern side of our county, when I'm counting our leks, I've seen a lot of leks, even from when I started in 2016 here, go from anywhere from a dozen birds down to 5-6 birds. And when you start getting down to that number, you have to start thinking of genetic bottlenecks or just a loss of diversity in the genetics too with the birds. So it's not just that we're losing leks, it's also we're losing number of birds on the leks. That's equally as concerning.
Yeah, that leaves just a smaller gene pool. So you add outside influences into that, like disease, and it's hard to propagate. I imagine once you've reached a certain level, I mean, the gene pool is very susceptible. There's not, like you said, enough variation within it.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's even worse the further east you go. Within our range, there used to be birds kind of up in Zach Sims in really decent numbers, but now in Cloquet area or wildlife area as well down to Pine County, but now they're just finding out of these historical lek sites, they're just finding a handful and with really low attendance. I mean, 1 or 2 dancers at the most. So
the only time I've seen a sharptail in Minnesota was on Highway 70, headed from Rock City over to the St. Croix River. I guide on the St. Croix River, and I had 4 or 5 of them. I can't remember now. I just flew right across the road, about 30 yards in front of the truck, and clear as day, they were sharptails. They were not roughies. And it was the only time I've ever seen them, and it kind of blew me away that they were there. But after I started peeling back the onion and find out they're across the river there, but Minnesota's still been a little bit of elusiveness. I kind of dove into Wisconsin because there's no season over there, and they're kind of doing some drastic things from a research standpoint, trying to get a hold on exactly what's going on with the decline that they're seeing. I am terribly sorry about that, guys. I forgot to close my email browser. With that all being said, Derek, can you give us a little bit of a view, I guess, on where the East Central population was and kind of is more concentrated today? Because I don't really know.
Sure, yeah. So a lot of these open brushlands, speaking historically, are old lake bottoms. So here in my area, we had a glacial lake, Lake Aiken, where when that lake filled in and created the peatlands we have, it still remains, I guess, historically too wet for forests to grow. So they kind of filled in more as grasslands, wet meadows, brushlands, and that's where these populations are living currently. So the East Central Range, it kind of expands. I guess looking at the county, I'd kind of say it kind of follows that Minnesota river bottom in my area and goes up to Zach Sims if your listeners are familiar with where that is, and into Cloquet County.
Mississippi River bottom.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, you said Minnesota. At least that's what I
sorry.
heard.
Sorry.
Maybe you did say Mississippi, but it was just so. So that Mississippi corridor on up to what would be east of Duluth, kind of.
Yep. East of Duluth. And then I think there's also a lake bottom kind of down by where your Wisconsin Sharptails were.
Yeah, Lake Grantsburg.
Yep.
And so that's kind of leads me into kind of my next segue question related here. And just to kind of understand the dynamics, again, the listeners have heard a little bit on what maybe habitat has been declining in Wisconsin and how related the sharptails in Wisconsin are to our sand barrens or pine barren region, which is a small region from basically Grantsburg to Bayfield area, Ashland area. And it's a jack pine heavy. It's disturbance heavy from pre-settlement era, lightning strikes and forest disturbance had been very prevalent in that area because it's so dry. That sand lake bed, it just sucks that water right. I mean, you get rain up there in the morning and you could have a high fire danger in the afternoon. That's kind of how drastic it is. So looking at Minnesota sharptails, that's a different animal. You guys are talking peat predominance in the open areas. I'm trying to kind of draw a correlation between like a pine barren rolling kind of hills, very sandy soil, jack pine, scrub oak. But you go across the river and now you're talking about peat bogs is kind of, from what I understand, in open brushland areas as well. But you don't have the pine barren, the sand barren correlation that Wisconsin does. Is that correct in kind of assuming that?
Yeah, I would say that's correct. Maybe up in Kyle's area, you kind of have a little more drier sites, but primarily in Aiken, it is all lake bottom peats. Brushland's kind of the main habitat, I guess I would associate these animals with in my area.
Sure.
Yep, and up here in the northwest, we do have some drier sites, and those are going to be more associated with oak savannas and native prairie habitat. But there is a significant component of those open brushlands, peat bogs. But the one common denominator is whether you're here in Minnesota or in Wisconsin, what the sharp-tailed grouse needs is that disturbance that you talked about with lightning strikes, and we mimic that these days through prescribed fire and other means.
Which go ahead, Derek.
And I was going to say also, yes, maybe they're just right now currently limited to that peatland because that's what maybe hydrologically that's what's staying open for them. Maybe there was upland sand knobs lacking forest on it historically, but now they're utilizing the peatland habitat because that's what creates the habitat they need, that open landscape.
One more point to that, and I guess again, good segue, Derek. You're getting pretty good at this for teeing them up for me, but you guys have obviously we're going to touch on your spring fling here coming up, but with the disturbances and looking at a little bit of this history, and again, we're going to cover a little bit more of this as well, but just to kind of tease maybe the listeners who are maybe scratching their heads a little bit as to how we got here. How much of the DNR's position and the Sharptailed Grouse Society's position, how much do you all know or have done research to corroborate the fact that we're just not logging as much as we used to? And how much of that affects this sharptail? Because the logging is a huge disturbance. And I know that that's a huge component into how Wisconsin's managing their sharptail population because of the encroachment of kind of, I guess you could call it old growth forest at this point, because it's been there for 100 years now since it was cut. So that element, the land disturbance, but forestry in specific, that area, it has been a big tool that they've used. How much of that plays into the East Central management thought practices for those sharptails versus maybe the Northwest?
I would say it is getting better. We started this process called MOAs, and we developed a new open lands MOA, which MOA stands for Management Opportunity Area. So
Okay.
around our sharptail complexes, we have created these MOAs, and we are looking at intensified logging, shorter rotations, trying to set back that forest as much as we can. But one important, I guess, factor I would say is we got two different types of forests too. We have an aspen forest here where we cut it. We might get 5 good years of, or even probably less, honestly, of an open landscape, but that forest is going to regenerate back without a heavy hand. Where I feel like your situation, you can cut a jack pine forest and control it better with fire, or it just grows back more slowly as well. So it's not.
It's not
I
the
guess
same, and that's why I was trying to kind of understand a little bit of that, because there is some elements now in Wisconsin where they're, especially up in like Bayfield County, northern Wisconsin, where they're really starting to bring in that kind of holistic approach to managing this. And it sounds like you guys are doing something similar, where that outside or that buffer zone per se, where it can be managed for woodcock and rough grouse as well. You guys can open that up in a fashion similar to how Wisconsin's managing it, where, they're going in and disturbing things for sharptails, basically, around these edges of the existing habitat. And they understand that, it's going to be sharptail habitat for a few years, and then it's going to turn into, songbirds and woodcock, and then it'll be rough grouse habitat again. And then through rotation, they'll come back in and harvest again and hopefully kind of expand that territory. They're trying to link a couple of these segmented island populations through this practice. So I was just kind of interested to learn a little bit of how much there might be a correlation into some of that, because again, those jack pine forests are edged by aspen forests. So there is a predominant element of aspen up there that they have to manage for and try to open up in order to create this new open space for sharptails, really. So I imagine you guys are doing more of that in the Northwest territory, because that is, well, as you get into the north central part of Minnesota, it's peat bog, pine, and aspen, right? Kyle?
Yep, and then when you get up here into the far northwest, I guess for the listeners, I'm located up in Marshall County, and we're 1 hour from the Manitoba border and 1 hour from the North Dakota border. And where we sit is right on the transition zone between the Tallgrass Aspen Parklands and the Agassi Lowlands. So
Can you,
the Tallgrass Aspen Parklands, go ahead.
I was just going to say, can you elaborate a little bit more on those two types of landscapes? Because again, I'm a Wisconsin boy. Those are new terms for me, and I've got viewership or listenership all over the world. So,
Sure.
yeah, just trying to break that down a little bit more.
So the Tallgrass Aspen Parkland, this is an area that historically has seen frequent disturbances, and what you see out there on the landscape is kind of a mosaic of prairie and sedge fens. You have groves of aspen. You get into some of those oak savanna habitat types, and then of course the extensive open brushlands that are critical for the sharp-tailed grouse. And as you transition to the east, you hit the Agassi Lowlands, and you're going to see the overall forest cover type start to change. You're not seeing as frequent of habitat disturbances through lightning strikes, fire, that sort of thing, and you'll see more mature forests. You'll get into red pine stands, some white pine, expansive black spruce bogs, and certainly there's and that's where we're going to run into a lot of our fen habitats and large expansive peatlands. And within the right on that transition zone, you get into that tallgrass aspen parkland, and if you don't have that disturbance, what you see is that transition from the more open brushland habitats to now a more brushland habitat. And then over time, that will typically, if it's a drier site, that will succeed to aspen forests. And uh, at that point, you're losing your good quality sharp-tailed grouse habitat. And that's why it's so important to have that disturbance out on the landscape frequently to keep it open for them.
Well, it makes sense, and I think that's kind of the segue into why you guys are raising some money as the Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse Society, trying to. I'm looking at my stack here of papers with a bunch of brush cutting habitat days for volunteers, and that all takes funds and money and equipment rentals. And let's chat a little bit about what you guys have coming up here this spring. So you guys got a spring fling and double gun shoot on April 30th in
Correct.
Pine City.
Yep, over in Pine City is our biannual spring fling. I think it actually has been 3 or 4 years since our last spring fling due to COVID and all that. But we're very excited to get back in person and have a meeting. And we have a little twist this year with the double gun shoot. So basically, the day of the spring fling, again, April 30th, that's a Saturday. We'll kick off the day with a birding tour, and then we'll transition into morning talks and presentations, and that's on everything from habitat research to the latest on what's happening with sharp-tailed grouse in Minnesota, and a variety of other things. And then in the afternoon is when we have the double gun shoot that teams of up to 5 people can participate in, and it's just kind of a fun event to raise funds that ultimately go back into habitat and possibly acquisitions for sharp-tailed grouse.
So what does an acquisition look like for sharp-tailed grouse?
So what maybe I'll step back a little bit and talk about the legacy amendment that the Minnesota voters passed.
Yeah, that's fine if you want to lay the groundwork for that, because I do think it's very important. I don't know that every sportsman understands the nuances for the legacy amendment.
Yeah, so this really is an incredible thing that the Minnesota voters passed back in 2008. And essentially what the legacy amendment does is raises sales tax by 3/8 of 1%, and part of that money goes back into habitat projects, and potentially acquisitions. And what these nonprofit organizations do, like Minnesota Sharptail Grouse Society, is they identify a project or an acquisition and come up with a grant proposal, apply for that, And what the Sharptailed Grouse Society needs is a 5% match. So what they're able to do, which is the coolest part about this, is take $5,000 and turn that into $50,000. So all of a sudden, that dollar is going a long way, and they are getting an incredible amount of work done. And it's the legacy amendment is helping out the Minnesota Sharptail Grouse significantly, and it's something that is good for 25 years. So when it kicked in, we have that funding source through 2034.
I've fished many trout streams that have had legacy amendment signs on them. There's more than just trout streams. I've seen water, wildlife management areas, and a number of different things. But we had talked, Kyle, in kind of the pre-call too about some of this and really creating the awareness and driving to get some volunteers for some of your projects that you have coming up. There's a unique opportunity that lies within that from a volunteer perspective that actually ties back to funding. Can you explain to the listeners a little bit about that element as well?
Absolutely. So I believe you'll be posting information for our brush cuts that are coming up later this month in March and also in April. So the way these volunteer brush cut days work is we have a designated day. Let's just say for one area, when we have 4 different ones coming up. So let's just say we have a brush cut on March 26th. People can gather, come out. The Sharptailed Grouse Society provides brush saws.
And that specific March 26th brush cutting is at Mille Lacs Wildlife Management Area?
I would have to look at.
I'm looking at it right now.
There's also one at Aiken. I think there's maybe 3 going on that day all around the state. Correct, Kyle?
I was kind of looking at that. I'm like, man, you guys are efficient. You guys are getting these things done in multiple parts of the state. So,
yep. And then the one up by me over in Badette got postponed because of the current snow depths. Right now we have about 2 feet of snow in the woods, so we're gonna have to let that snow melt down a little bit before we can effectively get up there and cut the brush.
I'm glad you rather than me.
But back to the March 26th dates. Volunteers, anybody can come out, whether you're 10 years old or 80 years old, and you spend a day hanging out with people that all kind of share that passion for the sharp-tailed grouse. And lunch is provided. And the coolest part about this is each volunteer is able to claim $28.54 per hour that goes back to the Sharptailed Grouse Society in the terms of a match for a CPL grant. So you can see that you get 10 individuals out there for 5 hours. The dollars start to add up, and rather than the Sharptailed Grouse Society needing to find the funds in the form of cash, and remind you, the Sharptailed Grouse Society is a relatively small organization of around 300 individuals. So having these opportunities to make the matches for these grants is significant, and it's really exciting, and it allows the Sharptailed Grouse Society to get so much work done.
And too, I think listeners and everybody's budget's getting a little tighter today. And so they hear this stuff, and what they might not understand is that this legacy fund is very well flush already in the state of Minnesota. There's money sitting there waiting for projects. So this is a really unique opportunity for you guys to kind of earn that sweat labor and get access to those funds that are already there without having to actually come up with the cash yourselves as a group.
Exactly.
And especially for a group that's 300 people in size trying to tackle something like this, that's a hell of an opportunity.
It certainly is. And if you're listening and you're looking at your calendar right now and, I got different plans on March 26th, well, you can sign up for a self-guided brush cut where you can visit it outside of those dates, go to the brush site, work for 2 hours or 5 hours, and claim those hours. So you don't have to commit to the March 26th date if you have previous engagements.
I'm not sure which one of you guys want to tackle this question. Kyle, we've been kind of going at it. I'm sure Derek's over there going, when am I going to pipe into the conversation here? So maybe Derek, you could answer this, but how would people, like, if they weren't available on, say, the 18th or the 26th on the days that you guys are going to have your group out there, should one of them contact somebody within the Sharptailed Grouse Society, Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse Society, to get more information on exactly where these things are? How would one, if they were interested and not available, dig in and get the information so they would feel comfortable going and doing the work, and then also helping you guys claim those hours?
Oh gosh, you caught me off guard here. I haven't actually reviewed the flyer in quite some time, but I
Well,
believe the flyer
if
does
Kyle
out.
wants to answer it, Derek, we got plenty of other stuff we can talk about here. It's on another topic.
Yep. I was trying to dig up the flyer here and see what it said on it, but
Yeah, it says volunteers during this period, at least 1 week prior, email Jody Profs, who's a volunteer. But so it sounds like I will include some information in the show notes on this, and then also a link to where people can get the full flyer. If they were to search out on like Facebook or anything like that, is this information available out there?
Yes, it's posted on the Minnesota Sharptail Grouse Society Facebook page.
Okay. I will make sure to include that in links. And then I'll push some of this information out to other mediums of mine here over the next week, 2 weeks
Great.
here, to try to gin up a few extra guys. I wish I was slightly closer, and with gas and diesel approaching $5 a gallon, I saw yesterday. I'm going to have to look at just trying to compile more than coming up to cut brush. I got to find an activity as well, or some reason to run up there, grab a something that I'm buying from somebody, or you know what I mean. Economies of scale today aren't as easy. So I'd honestly, if there was a listener that was interested and knowing with everything getting tight today, I'd grab a buddy, split a tank of gas, and head on up there and help you guys out. I'm going to hit the Rolodex here myself and see if I can't maybe find somebody to help me cover my cost of gas. I'd like to try to get out and help you guys because, again, for me, I've got this picture of sharptails in like Montana or out on the prairie or in the pine forest of Wisconsin. And what's so unique about Minnesota is it's kind of this transition line. And I mean, you guys know, you've lived here most of your life. You're in the DNR, but you know, Kyle, up by you, that transition line between the different habitats is very slim, and it kind of necks down kind of out by Detroit Lakes area, and then it kind of widens back out as it north of the Mississippi per se as it heads east. So it's just such a biodiversity of habitat, and it's kind of very unique to the state of Minnesota. And
It really is. Yep.
I really appreciate you guys kind of highlighting a little bit of this on the Sharptails because it's different than I would have perceived. So let's talk a little bit more about this double gun thing you got going on, or double gun shoot. What is a double gun shoot? I'm not familiar. I have spent some time shooting a little bit of trap as a kid and sporting clays, but never really got into it.
Sure. Well, for this event, the double gun shoot, participants will use either a side by side or over under shotgun, and at Wings North there are 10 shooting stations, and each team will rotate through the stations, and each participant will shoot 5 clay targets, and then they'll tally up the scores. And I believe the way it's going to work out for this particular event is like first, 8th, and 24th place will all get medals. All of the proceeds that are generated from the double gun shoot itself it's just a fun fundraising event, and all that is going directly back into applying for these CPL grants, the Conservation Partner Legacy grants that are under an umbrella underneath that legacy amendment. One important thing to note is if a person doesn't have a double gun, the side by side or over under, there will be shotguns available at the event for people to use, so you don't have to stress about that.
Well, if anyone's down here in the cities and is in need of a side by side and wants to go with this thing to me, hit me up. I've got an extra 20 gauge you could use. And depending on how my shooting is, you might get an opportunity to shoot a 28 gauge because I might want that 20 gauge back. So, real quickly, you guys, Derek, you hunt rough grouse at all? Being that you're more in, well, you can't hunt your sharptails over there. So,
Yeah, no, I hunt about everything that I can. It's a great area of the state for hunting rough grouse too. One of my main job duties in the fall is maintaining hunter walking trails. So we have a pretty extensive system on our wildlife management areas just for people who want to use non-motorized trails for hunting rough grouse as well.
It is
we
a
also-
unique thing to Minnesota. I will say when I moved over, that was one of the first places I started looking for opportunities to hunt in Minnesota with my dog, was on these hunter walk-in trails. And I found a plethora of them, and I was really, really surprised because it's just something I didn't see over in Wisconsin. We got plenty of logging opportunities and logging trails to walk in Wisconsin, but not specific hunter walk-in trails, which is pretty cool. So, Derek, when did you get into upland hunting, and are you a over under or a side by side guy?
I'm not your traditional upland hunter. I'm more actually probably a waterfall guy. So I still just use my Winchester SX3 for rough grouse as well. But I mean, I grew up hunting. My dad was pretty into hunting, so I had the opportunity to grow up doing it. And I've been doing it ever since I was legal, since I can remember. Oh,
So, are you a fall bow guy? Do you do bow hunting at all?
Yep. I archery hunt. I'd honestly probably say my passion is more trapping than anything.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's kind of a dying tradition. It seems like.
Definitely is. It's something I've wanted to personally just get in and kind of, because it is dying. There's certain people that the knowledge base is diminishing, and it's one of those things where pretty soon, if you're not in tune with the right folks, it's not going to be there to be passed down. So my buddy got into it 2 years ago, and I've always been personally wanted to kind of do it. I've got some coons on my property I need to get rid of now that I have the privilege to manage critters on my property.
Definitely. I mean, there's a wide variety of animals too. That's kind of one of the reasons I like waterfall hunting so much is you just never really know what you're gonna get either. Every day could be like Christmas, So I'd suggest, if you're looking for a new pastime, there's not as much money in it anymore as there was in trapping, but I just enjoy doing it. It's not even about money. So
Yeah, I think you learn a set of skills that puts you in harmony with nature at a different level than just hunting does.
And as far as the wildlife effects of trapping, I mean, look at sharptails and ground nesting predators. I think we're helping our game species through trapping as well.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother conversation that could open up an hour-long can of worms that we're not going to go down today. So, but it is you guys are doing a service that was done at a much grander scale not too terribly long ago. So it's like you said, it needs to be done, and I appreciate everybody who does trap, and I wish I could find more time. So you guys got to take a quick break. Let's take a quick one. I got to drop an ad in here anyways. So
Because you listen to this outstanding podcast, I'd like to invite you to check out another one that you may like as well. I'm Tom Rowland, host of Saltwater Experience television show and the Tom Rowland podcast. Each week, I drop 3 brand new shows, including interviews with extreme performers like the true giants of the fishing world, authors, athletes, Navy SEALs, and regular people with extraordinary stories to learn what took them to the top and how we can apply those same principles to our lives. How-to episodes are on Tuesday, and tune in for Physical Fridays to make sure you're on the path to catch a tarpon when you're 95 years old or be at your very best tomorrow. So search for the Tom Rowland Podcast where you listen, or go to tomrowlandpodcast.com and come on over.
all right, refueled and off the break here. Just want to remind everybody, we were talking about this spring fling double gun shoot event up at Wings North. Is that what it is?
Yep.
Yeah, Wings North, and then who's the Wild River Conservancy? Just kind of curious, real quick. I saw that on the list too, because they're doing the bird tour in the morning.
Yep, we have Jeremiah Walters with the Wild River Conservancy that will be kicking off that tour starting at 6:30. Jody Provost has the connection with Jeremiah over with the Wild Rivers Conservancy, and she set up that morning birding tour. But yeah, they are all about preserving rare ecological aspects. And
so are people going to go out and get an opportunity to look for warblers and things like that? I mean, is that kind of what the program is in the morning?
Yep, whatever would be passing through that corridor that particular time of year. So I would imagine there'll be opportunities for viewing waterfowl and warblers and you name it.
Yeah, there's all kinds of species we could go on the rest of the day of what's coming north that time of year. Cool. Well, there's a burger bar, double gun shoot. You get a membership to the Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse Society, and looks like you guys have just a jam-packed full day of opportunity to corroborate with other hunters and have a bunch of activities and good food and a good time.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, and in addition to that, there is the silent auction and general raffle. So we're working diligently right now to get items for that, and we do have 3 different shotguns secured for prizes. So
nice.
There's going to be a lot of good stuff for folks that attend the event.
Well, I'm looking at my schedule, and if I can get the paperwork done and my schedule all aligned, I'm going to try to donate a half a day to you guys so you can auction that off. We just did that with the Trout Unlimited group and helped raise $500 for them. So if I can help with that, I would love to. And I'm going to try to get that done here for you, Kyle, here in the next couple days. So, yeah. So any of the listeners want to come out and to the double gun shoot and spring fling on April 30th, and hopefully I'll have a trip in there and they can maybe come fish with me and raise some money for the Sharptail grouse in Minnesota. Anything to add on that real quickly? Otherwise, I was going to hand it off to Derek for a little bit of stepping back and kind of just laying the landscape of where we came from and where we're at today with Sharptails. We talked a little bit about it in the beginning, but what is the history on Sharptails and how much of our progression as development and logging over the course of the last 100 years here has maybe helped or hurt them over over that time frame. Can you give us a little bit of the history, Derek?
Yeah, sure. We kind of mentioned, earlier that these birds were probably always associated with these glacial lake bottoms, but speaking more for, I guess, the Aiken area than anything, with human development became, I guess, more habitat for sharptails here. Around the early 1900s, we've seen really intense logging, some pretty good fires that opened up a lot of habitat for sharptails here in this area. But since then, I guess, our current decline, we have been seeing the succession happening where the brushlands are becoming forests, that grassland's becoming more enclosed brushland. Um, you know, Even if we have brushland, it isn't necessarily perfect habitat for them. Sharptail, for their lek sites, they need quite an open area. And any vegetation that gets more than 5 feet can actually harm them at that point. Um, so I guess, yeah, historically, it opened up through logging. Another thing I think that's important in my area, especially, is hydrology. Back then we did a lot of wetland draining, put in ditches, tried to turn our ground into farm ground, and now that's impacting the current habitats negatively, making the sites a little bit drier, changing hydrology, allowing that brush to grow thicker and faster. Also, just with farming, sometimes farming can actually improve ground. Thinking here, we used to have a lot of dairy farms, beef farms. People used a lot of hay ground. When those farms went away, a lot of our ground is basically seeing succession, and we're losing that habitat.
I would imagine that proper rotational grazing in the Northlands in proximity to sharptails would be a benefit to a certain degree because they have that open landscape.
Yep, it's a management tool that we could use. One of the factors, again, what makes managing for sharptails in my area especially difficult is we do have fairly wet ground, and you can actually cause some damage with grazing too if the ground's too wet. But again, that's a technique. If we can identify the right spots, that would be a great benefit to sharptail. Some of the other things we're doing
So,
to
real
to
quickly
set
though,
back succession. Oh yeah, go ahead.
let's come back to that, setback succession. But,
Okay.
you know, looking at the history and just the prevalence of it, of logging and opening up the landscape, and then people developing and us not logging nearly like we used to in the economies of scale. We still do a lot of logging, but we log in a much different fashion, select cutting, smaller clear cuts, more precise, and I guess you could say dynamically than we used to. Um, do we, as wildlife management people, DNR, Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse Society, do we have a baseline for kind of where these birds should be? I know we all want to see them increase, but are we pushing water uphill in certain areas? Because talking in, I guess, our break, I've been into some of the areas and hunted some areas for rough grouse that borderline some of the historic range of sharptails in East Central, and it's swampy. I mean, it's not what I would call accessible or enjoyable to hunt until it freezes up. And do you think that if we were to do things a little bit differently, it, how much of it can we impact? Do you know what I'm saying with that question and kind of that pushing water uphill and trying to find a baseline? Because we've done so much disturbance and had such a swing in things. Do we know how to really implement it? And I don't mean that as a dig on the DNR or it's just an honest question. And if you don't want to answer it, totally cool. if you want to take the DNR badge off of for a minute to answer that, cool. I'm just kind of curious.
I think you bring up a valid point, and I think one of the issues with a sharp-tail is its need for such a large landscape. I kind of mentioned before that these birds may use an area that are up to 3 square miles big. We talked about kind of the lack of funding for projects and how Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse Society is helping those projects in a way by funding them through CPLs and OHF funding. But yeah, it's going to take a lot of money to impact the area that a sharptail needs, and I think that's kind of one of our main issues is just lack of funding and the lack of ability to do such a large scale disturbance that it's going to be super beneficial. I mean, we kind of got free management back in the early 1900s with the logging industry, which probably harmed a lot of other species, but for sharptails, we obviously saw the numbers skyrocket. I mean, they got all of a sudden a lot more habitat for I guess free is what I'd call it. But yeah, I think it's
a difficult situation.
It is.
And yeah, honestly, and that's why I kind of phrased things the way I did, because I've interviewed people from Wisconsin and these sharptails that inhabit this brushland or kind of north woodland area, I guess, maybe, and not the prairie where people might be associated more with sharptails out in western North Dakota, Montana, all that. It's just a whole different animal. And what's really interesting to me is the delicacy of the management practices that are kind of being implemented. There's similarities, but there's all these different nuances in between Wisconsin, East Central Minnesota, and up by you, Kyle. So there's a lot of money needed to do this.
And it's an in-between habitat. I mean, people either think of grasslands or they think of forest. I'm not sure how many of your listeners have even heard of brushland.
Yep.
And that's just kind of the main challenge is it's a habitat that sees succession happen fairly rapidly. We need to set it back more frequently. And that all takes money. I mean,
yeah. And what you were mentioning earlier, and I cut you off with the setback. Are you guys changing some of the regulations or rules around setbacks to help for this? Again, I cut you off, so I was trying to bring.
I was just going to say some of the management techniques we use to set back our brushlands, and kind of segue into Kyle maybe is we do a lot of forestry mulching, mowing of the brush, burning is a big tool we have in our toolbox. Usually we couple those two together. We'll do mowing and then burn several years later to help set back the resprouting. But that's another factor right there. I mean, most of this brushland species, you cut them once and they just flush back with sprouts, and you usually have to do an integrated management to actually reduce the cover of the brush.
It makes sense. It's a tough landscape to manage, and like you said, it's this transition land. It's a mixture of a lot of different landscapes because you've got that transition line. So you've got two different habitats coming together. So it's often mixed with kind of a third element, and that it lends itself to be tough to manage. Plus the band of area is sometimes relatively thin, especially in Wisconsin and certain areas in Minnesota where there is that biodiversity to even hold the habitat. So one of the questions I guess we can segue into the habitat and what really needs to happen, but I don't know if either one of you guys are familiar with like the heath hen out east. Have you ever done any research on that or heard of it?
I haven't.
Okay.
I've heard of them, but yeah, I never really looked them up or been able to hunt them.
No, and nobody has for some time. I'm definitely not somebody who should be educating two guys from the DNR on heath hens, but from what I read, there were species out east that was heavily dominant along the eastern coast in the heath shrub habitat, and with development along the coastal lines, that habitat disappeared to the point that this bird no longer exists. But what I found very interesting in reading about that particular bird was what seemed to be unique to the management or habitat of our sharptails here versus, again, out on the prairie is the element of this heath shrub component. Is that fair to say here in Minnesota? I know it's slightly fair to say in Wisconsin.
This episode is brought to you by Seventh Generation, New York. Did you know that climate pollution costs the state $27.5 billion every year? That isn't some national number, but a direct impact on your well-being. Climate pollution impacts all of us, our health, our communities, and our livelihoods. But it's not too late to change course. As you hear this, a $15 billion investment sits on the table of Albany's legislators. This is an opportunity to transition New York into a regenerative economy and invest in you, in us. It's vital help for communities hit hardest, with improvements in infrastructure and a more stable grid. It's a commitment to a future-fit labor force with job retraining and greater benefits. And it's money back in your pockets through lower energy costs and direct support for low to moderate income households. Tell Albany today. Invest in New York. Invest in us for future generations. To find out more, visit seventhgeneration.com/climate.
Derek, Kyle. I got Derek. Kyle's on mute.
Are you drawing the comparison between?
I'm trying to draw the comparison for the habitat for the heath, because we have this brushland habitat is filled with kind of heath shrub style components. And am I correct in saying that here in Minnesota?
Yeah, I was gonna say, a sharptail just can't use just grassland, and it can't use a forest. It kind of needs this mix of brushland. It needs some brush. It can't just be grass, and it can't just be purely brush or forest as well, if that's alluding to your question.
Yes. I mean, we've
Okay.
been drawing that kind of conclusion, and it's just a different topic or a way of, I guess, expressing brushlands. But, that bird out there died because of habitat loss. And luckily, we have enough land around here that we have enough habitat potential. It's just a matter of managing it and keeping it at brushlands, because it will, without disturbance, grow something that isn't quite a forest and quite brushland. It's thick.
And
Yep.
and that and it requires it's pretty labor intensive to keep it in that state. If in a perfect world, I have these brushland units identified, and we are going out and burning them using prescribed fire every maybe 4 to 7 years to just kind of keep it in that ideal open brushland landscape. Now you get a series of wet years where you can't get out and do the prescribed burning, or other factors that come into play. Maybe you don't have enough staff to have enough people out on that prescribed burn. And next thing you know, 10 or 12 or 15 years has gone by, and now the brush has come up too thick where you can't effectively carry the fire through it. Then you're implementing the other management activities where we use shearing with the bulldozers or the forestry mulching, that sort of thing. So it's a labor intensive. It takes a lot of coordination, and sometimes the stars just have to align if you get into a wet cycle and you can't get that disturbance in. There's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things I was going to kind of draw parallels to with the heath hen is that that bird was pushed out of its landscape because people wanted to build homes on its landscape, more or less. And you've got other commercial developments that happen on on the coastal lands. We don't have that dynamic up here. All we do have to do is manage the habitat. Out there, out east, stuff doesn't grow very well when you're in sand and on a coast, and it naturally takes care of that as long as a hurricane comes through, it opens it up real quickly. We don't have those disturbances that we allow on the landscape today, because those disturbances prior to our settlement were fires. We don't allow those fires to burn nearly at the rate that they did in the past. I mean, we fight wildfires. We put them out. We have fire stops with roadways that tend to knock these things out, unlike there were 100 years ago. So you have to run big bulldozers with cutting tools that cost diesel and all this stuff. What is a typical track of brushland that's got a management plan? What's a 10-year, how are they managed? 5-10 year cycles? Kyle, you want to give us a little in-depth into that?
You bet. So yeah, in a perfect world, again, all the stars aligned and everything with these large brushland units, we're seeing some sort of disturbance out there every 4 to 8 years or so to keep them in that particular state. So that's the goal with all of this. But I guess to step back a little bit, we are in a very fortunate situation here in Minnesota where we have a lot of public land. And you and I were talking the other day about my area in particular, where we have
a ton. You've got
115,000 acres.
Yeah.
So we have 115,000 acres of wildlife management area. If you bump up to the northwest of me in Kitson County, I think they manage about 80,000, and that's that prime.
And that's just state land.
And that's just wildlife management area.
Yeah, there's also other.
We have to the south of us, we have Agassi National Wildlife Refuge, which I think is about 50,000 acres, and then to the east of me, now that's when you're getting more into that Agassi Lowland country. We have Beltrami Island State Forest, we have Red Lake WMA. That in itself is 220,000 acres. So we have a significant amount of public land, which is great. That's a lot of opportunity, but it's a lot of habitat to manage, and
and it's state land though too.
Correct.
Because
yes, all of this is state land that
Derek,
that I mentioned, except for the Agassi.
Derek, you deal with a different dynamic where you've got more federal lands near you, correct?
Not quite here.
Not quite. Okay.
Aiken County, for this area of the state's actually pretty unique in the amount of public ground we have. I would say the county's 50 to 60% actually public land, and that's just kind of a remnant of it being old lake bottom and on farmable ground and undevelopable.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of ground to be able to do the management on.
Well, and so even in east central Minnesota and up to Cloquet, you got a ton of state forest land. I mean, I can tell you right now, my biggest problem with Minnesota is every time I pull open a map to try to go hunting somewhere, there's too much. I get impotent in the decision because I don't know which direction to head, especially once you get north of 94. So with all of that, having more land to manage than available resources really on the man front and manpower, horsepower side, unlike the heath hen where we just kind of pushed them out, we can make an impact on these birds was kind of my biggest point with all that. Mm-hmm. And it takes funding, it takes people, and it takes growing an organization like Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse Society to something bigger than 300 people is kind of my point. So with all of that, so let's talk about, like, back to this 10-year cycle of them. I mean, how many hands could help people in this equation? And go ahead, Derek. I cut you off.
Oh, I was just gonna say, kind of back to being such an area sensitive species, and maybe how that's impacting a sharp-tailed grouse population is I think historically, management has kind of taken priority around our Lex sites, and I think we need to start focusing perhaps on managing that whole complex. And back to funding and all that. To manage 10,000 acres, it's a pretty daunting task, especially if that's just 10,000 acres around a lek, and we have 20 leks in the county. Um, but I guess what I was trying to say with that is I think we need to take an approach where it's more than just managing the lek site, because I've seen it since I've started here that a lot of our burns are around lek sites and lek sites only, but those birds might be using several different habitats in a 10,000 acre chunk or complex.
Well, and there might even be private land mixed into that.
Oh yeah, a lot of our burns take some work on private ground, and we have a pretty good opportunity to do work on private ground. Maybe I should throw that in here. Pheasants Forever has been a great partner for Sharptail, and they have a farm bill biologist right out of the county here. And he actually gets quite a bit of work done on private ground using equip funds, and work directly done for sharptail habitat. So there's an option there, and it's neat to see that they're taking the route of helping private landowners improve habitat for sharptail, and I think that's one of the most important things we could do for sharptail here, because we aren't all public ground. I would say, just thinking about our leks, 50% of our leks are probably on private ground without actually looking at the exact number. So obviously we need that route to be able to influence those leks and that habitat.
Yeah, and I just actually the previous episode was with, and I got to give a shout out to gentleman down in Chile for pointing out one of my own personal flaws, that I tend to hog the conversation way too much when I have experts on. I love to talk, and it's probably why I started the podcast. But regardless, yeah, I just had Pheasants Forever on, Aaron, and the gentleman who kind of Tanner, who oversees the field biologists, and the work that they're doing to bridge that gap between public and private kind of partnership on an individual parcel basis is really impacting things. I think, again, giving a catapult to what we can potentially do in the future. But there's still more work that needs to be done, and that's kind of where you guys come in, especially at the DNR. And then, you guys are wearing two hats, both working on the Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse Society and impacting the habitat with your daily work. So there's always more work to be done. Brush always keeps coming back. I've learned with my years of managing buckthorn that no matter what I do, it's always there. I always got to cut. So, well, we're taking a different management practice approach, obviously, for sharptail than buckthorn, but it's still cutting brush, and it's still using equipment to open up habitat. So, Kyle, we kind of shifted gears in the middle of our last conversation about habitat management. Here at the end, we've had a pretty good show, but I've kind of cut you guys off a few times, and just want to make sure that I give you an opportunity here to clear anything that I may have interrupted.
I guess the biggest thing I would say, speaking from the DNR standpoint, is there's so much work that we would not be able to accomplish if it wasn't for our partners, whether that be Pheasants Forever, Sharptailed Grouse Society, Deer Hunters Association, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. All these organizations help significantly, and they're very, very appreciated in getting all this habitat work done on the ground.
You guys definitely bridge the gap of a number of organizations.
Yes.
So, Derek, is there anything that you wanted to add lastly here to the conversation, and then I got a couple other tie-up questions for you boys.
Yeah, I was just kind of looking at our outline here, and why is MSGS so important? I guess with all organizations, I mean, most of our work or our funding is, I mean, we're just user based. We're funded by the people who enjoy going out there and hunting sharptails, or we get a lot of deer habitat work done by people who like to hunt deer. So I just think it's important, whatever it is that you choose as your favorite species, just get involved, get out there, volunteer. If you can't find a time, donate. I think that's why MSGS is important to me, is because I jotted down on my paper that we've done 9.2 million over the past decade in OHF funding with Pheasants Forever. And that's acquisition, not just habitat work, but more importantly, maybe $750,000 in CPL grants. I mean, that's impacted a lot of habitat and done a lot of good for sharptails. It might not be enough, with the declines we're seeing, but I mean, what would that decline be without organizations like ours?
Well, and it's a good point. And it's kind of a little bit of a call to action for people that we're seeing a decline and it needs some help, and it needs more than we're currently doing. And the only way to do that is by supporting groups like this and getting out to the spring fling and helping raise money and going out, hopefully cutting some brush. I mean, these things make the most impact, right, Kyle?
Yeah, and one thing to point out is, yes, we're the Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse Society, but obviously the work that we're doing out there on the landscape isn't just for sharptail grouse. It's benefiting a plethora of species, from elk, white-tailed deer, sandhill crane. I mean, the list goes on. A lot of these species that depend or rely on the open brushland landscapes.
Well, I think too, what's unique about sharptail management is there's a lot more spillover than, say, if you were just managing for CRP land, or for what people traditionally think of as pheasant habitat, or cutting a forest down and creating a bunch of aspen habitat for rough grouse. It's more complex, and that also leads to more complex wildlife management, or more wildlife there.
Absolutely.
So, a couple quick things. How long has Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse Society been around?
Since 1986.
Were you guys born?
1987, I was.
1986.
Okay, I was 84, so you guys aren't that much younger than me. But no, I was kind of curious. I know you guys graduated college a little later than I would have, but so they've been around pretty much as long as all of us have been on the planet. Are you guys seeing it a passing of kind of the guard a little bit with kind of an older generation? You guys are younger now, getting involved. I'm seeing a little bit of that in Wisconsin. I was kind of curious what the dynamic is.
I think it's like most conservation groups. I would say, Kyle, that it seems like it's heavily skewed to the older generation that's members. And maybe again, this is a call to action for some of the younger conservationists out there to get involved.
Well, I've learned I use that term on myself extremely loosely. I talked to just a tease for an upcoming podcast, a gentleman who is our Wisconsin, one of the muskie biologists, and he basically said you don't get to become a conservationist if you just buy a license and go hunt these animals. You got to do more than that. So yeah, I mean, it is kind of a little bit of a call to, I think, the younger generation, and again, our budgets are all tight. Everybody wants our funding, but if you want to get outdoors and really call yourself somebody who cares about the landscape and finding that symbiotic relationship, you gotta you got to be involved.
And if you're listening and you can get a younger individual involved, go for it. And it doesn't have to be hunting. Like I think all three of us share that common experience with your first time out on a sharp-tailed lek and watching the activity, watching them dance around. And that's powerful stuff.
Extremely. And all three of us weren't carrying a gun. There wasn't a dog on the ground.
Exactly.
It was a perfect experience just to introduce somebody. I wouldn't say maybe it lends itself well for a kid that might be older than say 7 or 8. That's kind of out of the rambunctious stage. But outside of being quiet and sitting in a ground blind, I mean, something just as simple as going out for a walk in the woods. I think we take that for granted today way too much, and there's way too many distractions in life, and I'm guilty of it typically every morning when I open up my computer and tell myself I'm going to run the dogs before 10 a.m. No, I can also say that just the richness of taking somebody new in the outdoors and lighting that spark and seeing and kind of reverberating inside you and reliving some of those memories that you had that maybe you kind of lost. Man, those things are special. And when you can share that with somebody young, and it's what needs to be done and not done enough today, unfortunately, with the family dynamic. So I encourage people to, I don't know if you guys do any mentoring with kids, man, but it's so rich.
Yep, we a couple years ago, the Sharptailed Grouse Society, we did have a youth essay contest where youth wrote an essay about why they like the outdoors and were interested in maybe going on a sharptail hunt, and we brought the young gal that she came up with her dad to Northwest Minnesota here, and we spent a morning and early afternoon out walking the brushlands, and we had some luck and a lot of close encounters. So I think that was a pretty good experience for her. And I will make one quick plug for the spring fling coming up on April 30th. One of the general raffle items is a guided sharptail hunt with myself and Dave Pauley, the president of the Sharptailed Grouse Society up here in the Northwest. So whoever gets that will meet us for breakfast. Dave and I will treat you for breakfast at a local cafe, and then we'll maybe get out in time to maybe hear some elk bugling and spend some time out on the brushlands and walking and maybe encounter some grouse.
All right. Well, you did it. You opened up that can of worms. You just probably threw a bunch of listeners for a loop. Can you at least enlighten the listeners a little bit on what Northwest Minnesota has to offer there?
I don't know if we have enough time.
No, but just tell the listeners about the elk herd a little bit.
Yeah, so up here in the far northwest portion of the state, we have a couple different elk herds. Out of my office, we have the Grigla herd, which we just wrapped up flying our aerial surveys about a month ago now, and we have right at about 30 elk in that herd, and then there's a couple different herds up in Kitson County, and that's the furthest northwest county in Minnesota, and the elk are doing well up there, and there's definitely viewing opportunities for people if you're interested in seeing an elk or coming up in September and talking to me, and I can point you in the right direction where you might be able to hear an elk bugle. We talk about the the sharp-tailed lek in that experience, seeing that. If you haven't heard an elk bugle out in the wild, that's something else too. So,
it is.
Yep, it is.
I definitely have not taken advantage of applying for my tag. It's a very unique experience in Minnesota, and you guys actually harvest a few every year, which it's very cool.
Yep, Kitson County has been having a hunt for a number of years now. We have not had a hunt in the Grigla herd since 2012, but they have been taking about, I guess there's been about 20, 25 licenses available each year up in Kitson County for a few years now.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say we might have to have you back on for another show just to talk about that and the uniqueness of managing for that in the landscape, because elk bugle, yes, it's much like getting on, your first turkey gobble, and how life changing kind of that is too. But I will tell you, every time I hear one, it also reminds me of the pain, and being able to not have to go through the pain of hiking through mountains. It sounds very appealing to me. I don't know if either one of you have gone out west to hunt elk before, but it's tough. It's tough. We were in over the counter tag area, which plays a little bit harder element to it, but it's definitely not for the faint of heart.
No, it is not.
So I'm going to guess, Derek, if you want, I'm going to give you an opportunity to plug anything cool in Aiken County or in your management area for the DNR. If you want to plug anything or tidy up with the Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse Society.
Yeah, back to
what can you come back on the show, man, and can we make a whole show out of so we can tease people about your area? There's some cool stuff up there.
Yeah, it definitely is a cool area. I mean, I could just throw out, Kyle's got Thief Lake, but I got Rice Lake National Wildlife Refuge in my backyard. One of the areas that sees 1 million ringnecks every year. So it's a pretty unique area as far as wetlands go. We have the most wild rice of anywhere in the state. So if you're a wild rice harvester or interested in that, I would suggest looking at Aiken County for a trip.
Couple grouse and woodcock hang in there. I know that.
Yep. Really good woodcock hunting. We've got a lot of brushland, aspen woods. So really good rough grouse woodcock.
Excuse my novice for the term ringneck. What kind of duck is that?
Ringneck ducks?
Yeah.
A diver?
It's a diver. Okay.
Yeah.
Is it? I'm familiar with like bluebills and bufflehead, and I'm not familiar with the ringneck. I quit standing in puddles, man, and being cold in the fall. I started chasing dogs.
And a lot of people call them ringers.
Okay.
There's common names like bluebill, the scop, that kind of thing. But
so is it a bluebill?
No, they're ringneck ducks.
Okay,
they're their own species, but
They kind of look alike though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I have shot them when I was young, but I had buddies who duck hunt religiously and used to do it until my mid-20s, and I just lost interest.
The name comes. They have a kind of a rust-colored feather ring around the neck. So.
Sure. What else you get? How many? You said what? Like the largest population of ringnecks in the state that come in there?
Yeah. In the fall we get a migration of ringnecks to the refuge there, Rice Lake National Wildlife Refuge, and they've had counts of upwards of 1 million ducks at one time.
Wow.
Most primarily ringnecks. The wild rice is a good food source for them.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And we get a great migration of ringnecks through Aiken County.
Well,
so I would say that's probably the most unique thing in the county. I mean, you can find a lot of the other stuff elsewhere, but you're not going to find the rice lakes that we have here in the county.
Well, you're a trapper too, so we'll talk about that. There might be a whole thing we can have you back on just to talk about trapping.
Oh, definitely.
Well, I've really enjoyed our time here today, guys, and I really appreciate you making time available for me and the listeners.
Well, thank you for having us. It was enjoyable.
Any last plugs?
I think I got them out of my system. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, I appreciate everything that you guys have offered today, and I'll be in touch here with a few questions post this, but I'm going to get this thing out right away. So I want the listeners to understand that this is a great opportunity if you're here in the upper Midwest and want to impact sharptails in the state of Minnesota, where there is still a huntable population. And so if you can both put your money in the habitat and enjoy it, and not feel at least as desperate as people do in Wisconsin. So, but there are some desperate situations in the east part, and in the habitat work and research needs to be done. So great cause, April 30th, the spring fling. And if you're not going to be able to make it, folks can find you on the internet, Facebook, and can sign up to be a member right online, guys.
Yep. Sharptails.org.
Sharptails.org. Right on. Well, I'm going to end the show. Yeehaw! All right, folks. God, I love the bumper music. Thank you for being a loyal listener to the Amazing Outdoors podcast. If you are available on April 30th, you should consider coming out to the Double Gun and Spring Fling held by the Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse Society. Information is in the show notes. I will be there. The podcast might be there. Not 100% sure yet. So stay tuned for details, but sign up, be part of this event, and if you can, consider sponsoring a shooting station for $250. Details are at sharpease.org. I guess since I always ask everybody to join in the local conservation effort this week, I will ask you join the Minnesota Sharptailed Grouse Society. All right, spring is in the air. Upcoming episodes, I've got Jason from the National Shooting Sports Foundation. I've got Debbie Peterson from Woodcock, Minnesota. I've got Casey Yaley from the Wisconsin DNR. I've got Jordan Weeks from the Wisconsin DNR. I've got more people. Make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss the upcoming shows. Again, spring is here. The rivers are starting to open up. I think the raft's going in this week. The woodcock are probably going to start showing up here in the next week or so. I'm going to get out and run the dogs this afternoon. It's going to be 60 almost. God bless America. God bless this country. God bless you. This is Brian Mays. Tight lines. Shoot straight. I am out of here.